Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Staying Secure and Compliant in a Work-from-Home Environment. Today's event is brought to you by Progress and produced by Actual Tech Media. Before we get into today's topic, we first have a little bit of housekeeping here that we should cover. First off, we want this to be an educational event. We want you to get all your questions answered. We have a couple of expert presenters that I'll be introducing you to here in just a moment. But we encourage you to use the questions box in your audience console, which is just to the right of the word handouts. In fact, I can highlight it there for you. So check out that questions box. We've already got a lot of good comments coming in from the audience. Hello to everyone who's commented so far: Dallas, New Jersey, Houston, Denver. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate those comments and that those welcome comments coming in. Of course, we encourage your questions about today's presentation throughout the event, and we'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. We also have a couple of resources there in the handouts tab I encourage you to check out. There's the Ipswitch homepage with more details about the Progress software solution, and there's also a link to the MoveIt free trial, which you'll be learning about in today's presentation. We also have an Amazon $300 gift card that we're giving away to one lucky attendee on today's live event. If you're watching this on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the handouts tab where it says ATM prize terms. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. And with that, I'm excited to introduce you to today's expert presenters. They are Mr. Andrew Lorandos, who is a CCISP and a Principal Solutions Engineer at Progress, and Mr. Greg Mooney, Technology Evangelist at Progress. Andrew and Greg, thank you so much for being on the event today.
Glad to be here. Absolutely.
And with that, I will hand it over to Greg.
Yep. All right. Cool. So thank you for joining today. I'm sure most of you have been reeling with pivoting an entire workforce from an office to working from home. It's a lot for any IT team to handle, and we've all had to kind of go through those hoops over the past couple months. Obviously you have to kind of consider, the hardware, personal devices, and everything else. But, today we're going to kind of talk about kind of the issues that are coming up. Now that, most of us have kind of are pretty much set up and, probably have gone through all the initial issues of working from home. Now what we're kind of going to talk about today is, things you should be kind of worried about moving forward in the present day and into the future. So, today we're going to talk about, first the pain points of working from home, which I'm sure a lot of you are already aware of, but we'll just kind of quickly go over those. And then we're going to talk about a little bit about compliance and how, data compliance, regardless of, the move to a remote workforce, you're still on the hook for data compliance, probably even more so than before, considering that your perimeter defenses and all that has probably expanded, exponentially from moving to a remote workforce. And then we're going to go in a little bit of, the risks of, data loss, and how data transfers and, from a work from home culture can cause non-compliance and ways we can kind of help you with that, and talk a little bit more about managed file transfer and your data transfers and how we can kind of help you with our product MoveIt. And just so you know, to eliminate any confusion, I know we said, go to ipswitch.com to learn more about how we can help you with data compliance and data transfers. We were previously called Ipswitch. We were bought by Progress back in April of 2019. So just to eliminate any confusion, we are considered Progress now. The Ipswitch name will be going away, but all of our resources and everything you want to consume and engage with and free trials and all that stuff is going to be on ipswitch.com. That's IPSWITCH.com. And then, so once we talk a little bit about what managed file transfer is, we'll go into a live demo and then do a Q&A. But the first thing I want to talk about is the pain points of a work from home culture. Obviously, I'm not going to go into all the stuff you guys were kind of reeling with last month, with hardware and all that. You're probably already situated. Those issues have been kind of alleviated at this point. But things you need to kind of consider moving forward, especially with the new data compliance laws that are coming out, is your data security, as well as how your your employees are effectively collaborating with each other, and so peer-to-peer collaboration. How are they moving data from one place to another between themselves, maybe your partners, and especially your customers, because obviously if that data gets into the wrong hands, that's going to be a huge compliance issue for you, and nobody wants to get fined or get the finger pointed at them. So we'll kind of talk about ways to kind of minimize that risk. And then, some workflow issues. I know, probably one of the biggest issues we had moving to a remote workforce was, the business continuity issues. Some of us we're probably more set up. I did a webinar the other day, and I think the data point was about 80%. Of us are now working from home, unless you're working in, say, healthcare or another essential business. Most of you, if you're not in those industries, then you are all working from home. But it's about 20%, I think, are regulated industries in healthcare where you don't really have a choice. But one of the big things was that probably before the pandemic and the crisis we're dealing with right now, I think it was about 18 to 20% of employees were working from home. So that's a drastic shift and drastic pivot. So this is, I like to say, the new normal. I don't think things are going to get back to what they were before. I think we kind of have to embrace this work from home culture, but it brings up a whole bunch of issues in regards to, shadow IT, how, business continuity and data security. So, and then, last but not least, we're going to talk about, authentication, making sure people are who they say they are when they're logging into your apps and services, and obviously the compliance and data regulations that apply to you. So the first thing, obviously that's on our mind is data security. Some things you need to consider is that, as I said before, that the remote workforce increases the attack surface and chances of external threats, either by user error, social engineering, or lack of security tools that would otherwise be in place with a workforce in the office. But a couple of years ago, Computer Weekly's survey suggested that 81% of respondents in IT had dealt with a security incident due to remote employees. That's a pretty staggering number. The fear of having to deal with a preventable security breach is exasperated by the current business climate, but there are ways to mitigate these risks, and you're going to have to approach these issues differently than everyone being in the office. Some security issues you probably already considered is, obviously we're all training our employees on the dangers of social engineering. You should be continuously testing employees to ensure that they're, responding to security threats the right way. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and especially in the mainstream media about how to stay safe. Like, we could talk about, oh, you should have a strong password with, different symbols and numbers and capital and lowercase letters, but obviously passwords just don't cut it anymore. I like to talk. I've done quite a few podcasts on Defrag this. You can check that out at blog.ipswitch.com. We talk a lot about this thing called cyber hygiene, where your employees, you may not care about their personal security at home or when they're not on the clock, but the fact of the matter is, if they get hacked when they're at home, when, maybe they're being secure and safe at work, but if they're not doing that at home, the same thing, I mean, they're probably using the same passwords that they use at work. So, if a hacker gets access to their personal information, then that can go right over to your, business network, and then you're going to have a problem there. So, these are things you need to consider. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about peer-to-peer collaboration. Obviously, as I was saying before, once you kind of approach a work from home culture, you need to make sure, business continuity is, continues to be as it is. We all have SLAs, service level agreements, that we have to meet. And, just because there's downtime with people working from home, I mean, it doesn't, you're still on the hook. A lot of you probably have already signed contracts or of some sort, with your, higher ups, your managers, saying that, this is the, this is the amount of nines that we want to kind of have in our workforce. And if it goes past that, then you're going to start to get a lot of angry employees, end users. You're going to get too many tickets, and it becomes a mess for everyone. So, but today specifically, I want to talk about, the biggest thing about collaboration is, we're sharing data back and forth, and we want to make sure, employees can do that in an effective and secure manner. So some ways we can, do that is with, FTP or email. But if you're in like a regulated industry, which actually I would argue we're all in regulated industry now with CCPA and GDPR, but if you're concerned about compliance issues, you want to be able to get people to collaborate effectively and efficiently, but also do it in a way that's secure and compliant, and then gives you the visibility into the apps and services that your users are using, and where data is at rest, where it is in motion. So, we're going to talk about a little bit a few ways that you can do that effectively without, getting a backlash from your end users, so they go into start using something like shadow IT. But some questions to ask about your current workflows. This is kind of a checklist. This is kind of the first things that probably should come to mind when you're thinking about how your workflows, how your end users are collaborating together. Is your work being done efficiently and effectively? And is this affecting collaboration? Do you have the systems, the services, the applications that your end users or your customers need to get their job done? And is there a lot of manual process involved in this? Because when you got manual processes, I mean, you're going to run into human error, and human error leads to either data loss or maybe sending something to the, like, one example I think of a lot is you send an email with confidential data or sensitive business data to employee sends that to the wrong recipient, for instance. How can you fix that quickly if that happens? So, and that kind of goes into why, email may not always be the best approach to, sending data, receiving data that's sensitive. And then, are your SLAs being met? As I said before, you can only deal with so much downtime. And even if you don't have an SLA or something in print from your manager or your clients or what have you, I mean, at the end of the day, if your customers or end users can't get their job done, they're going to move to something like shadow IT they're going to take it upon themselves to fix those issues. And that's not something you want to have happening behind your back. You need visibility into that kind of stuff. And another thing I like to talk about a lot is can the processes be automated? And automation is great because you can kind of eliminate human error. You're more likely to meet your SLAs, and it increases efficiency, and it makes your job easier, and it makes your employees and end users and customers' job easier. So these are definitely things to consider if you're about your current workflows. Ask those questions. And if you are having issues with business continuity, the first issue that always comes up is shadow IT, especially when people are kind of working from home. I know me personally, ergonomically, I like to use my own hardware when I work from home, just because I have, my computer's faster than say my laptop but obviously you got to think about things like VPN, antivirus. Are your users, if your users aren't using their laptops and they're using their home equipment, is that equipment secure? Is there already malware on that equipment that could possibly expose your business data? these are all things you got to consider. And then there's, the third-party apps and services that they're using. A lot of people don't, consider, and like open APIs or third-party plugins for, say, an app they're using. Or do you even know what apps and services they're using? I know instead of Photoshop, for instance, I like to use GIMP to do a lot of stuff because it's free. I don't have to pay for it. It's on my home computer. But it's good to be. You need to stay engaged with your employees, and you have to be proactive about it to see what they're using and how they're working differently than in a remote environment than, say, in the office. Because in the office you have a lot more control. There's only so much they can connect. They can only connect to certain apps and services based because you have that control in an office environment. You don't really have that in a work from home environment because your employees are using their own environments, their own personal networks, so it opens up a whole can of worms, obviously, but there are ways to alleviate that, and it really comes down to communication with your employees on what they're using and how they're using it. And, obviously as IT people, me personally, I'm not like the most communicative person. A lot of us are introverts by trade. And, but, there's outside third parties, outside companies that can help you with that kind of thing to kind of get a repository, so to speak, of, what your employees are using. But I'm a big proponent of using, cloud applications like SaaS products, anything that can really give you more control over and visibility over what they're using. And a lot of employees enjoy using, a web browser or a portal to use like a SaaS product, and it makes things a lot easier for them. And I'm not going to get into the hardware aspects of this, but we're all well aware that hardware can be an issue, and you not physically being present to help an end user can that can be an issue as well. So, but for today's webinar, I'm not going to get too into that because you guys are probably well aware. And then, as I was talking about, like, SaaS or login to apps and services, I know Office 365 is that ecosystem is a huge, a huge help in, these days since people are working from home. But how are people authenticating to those? Are you just having them use a password to get in? I know, multi-factor authentication is huge, and I think everyone should be using that now. It's a great way to make sure an employee says who they say they are. So if they do get hacked or their device is hacked, at least there's another authentication method besides a password to make sure that, usually it's on their phone. You have those Microsoft or Google authentication apps that can kind of, absolutely prove that they're the person that they say they are. And, you want tamper evident logging and stuff that, on the back end to see what people are, what they're doing, who had access at what time. And this is especially important, when it comes to data compliance, data protection law, because, if you get audited or you're under investigation, if there happens to be a data breach, you want to be able to prove that, hey, I did everything to the best of my ability to make sure this data was secure and I knew who had access to this sensitive data at any given time. And that's going to be, your biggest, help if, say, you get a data breach or if you are audited. And I also recommend that people get internal audits or use a third-party service if you're a smaller company and you can't afford to do it yourself, to kind of audit yourself to see, where the security holes are on your network, especially nowadays. And then obviously, last but not least, this all ties into the whole issue of data compliance law. Email security, are you training your employees on phishing attacks? How are they, do you have problem employees that as much as you try to train them and tell them not to do something, they continue to do it? How are you testing them to make sure? There's so many ways you can do this. You can do it yourself. You can get third-party help to kind of understand, which employees are your biggest risk factor. And then, obviously the biggest thing, this stuff needs to be encrypted at rest and in motion. It's always been the case that healthcare and finance have always been kind of the main regulated industries where they've been doing this all along. So if you're in those industries, this is nothing new to you. But along came GDPR, and a lot of companies I talk to in the U.S. are like, oh well, I don't work with EU, or I don't have, I don't do business in the EU, or Australia data compliance law. I don't do business in Australia. But just so you know, the CCPA, California Consumer Protection Act, was just passed in earlier this year, January 2020, and it's loosely based on the GDPR. The government, the state governments, and even the federal government have taken notice to the issue of, data security and, identity theft and all that kind of stuff that, basically is a huge risk factor for businesses. And I think it's in the trillions. I think it's like almost up to in the $1 trillion of how much business is lost due to, all the security issues and data protection problems that are going on today. So, there's this patchwork of state by state laws that are coming out. So we're all on the hook now. It isn't just healthcare worrying about HIPAA or, federal governments or finance dealing with PCI DSS. We're all on the hook for it. So, and I'm not trying to scare you guys into that. I'm sure a lot of you are probably making great strides and trying to stay compliant, but this is kind of the business climate we work in now. So compliance and data security need to be super top of mind for you. And then, one thing I noticed a lot too with a lot of companies I work for is they're still using FTP, and the FBI a few years ago sent out a notice saying that anonymous FTP servers are kind of they're super unsecure systems. Hackers access them all the time. You can find them on Shodan if you want to look for them, and you'd be surprised how many people aren't even using passwords to protect these servers. So obviously FTP, even if it is password protected, do you have multi-factor authentication? And if you do, how much work is that trying to build scripts to basically understand, or build scripts and having to maintain them to have these systems running. So that's kind of why I want to get into. I'm going to hand it over to Andrew. He's going to kind of explain, certain ways that we transfer data and maybe, some, different alternatives of doing it so you have more access control and visibility on your end. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Andrew.
Perfect. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so, we're talking about all of these ways that we want to basically empower our users, ensure that we're providing them a pathway, a secure path to actually be able to transmit this data internally, be able to collaborate with each other. And one way that we're able to do that is with MoveIt. So MoveIt is really going to be a platform that these users can interact with, upload, download files, and we're really going to be able to facilitate that and provide that secure platform to do that using things like Greg mentioned. Encryption at rest is going to be a pretty big one, as well as in transit. So when files arrive on this service, we're going to be encrypting them using an AES 256 just to ensure that nobody can go in through the back end, access that data, be able to manipulate it in any way. So we're ensuring the security of the data on the back end. But then we're also going to ensure that users are required to authenticate and have permissions to the data that they're going to be accessing. So there's a few ways that we could approach that within MoveIt. One would actually be through the person-to-person workflow that we'll walk through today as part of the demonstration. But that could also be occurring system-to-system or person-to-system, a variety of mechanisms. And we can also automate these processes as well. So if these are more established relationships that we might have with some of our trading partners or clients, we can actually automate the pickup or delivery of the file, as well as then providing it to a backend resource. Obviously, a big component of this, especially when we are having a pretty dispersed workflow, is we want to have some form of scalability, whether that is from a load perspective or potentially just a business continuity perspective. So we want to have various deployment options, and we definitely do within MoveIt, to be able to provide those architecture options, basically. Greg really hit on this, but a big part of this is going to be compliance. So not only is it going to be regulated data like HIPAA, PCI, GDPR data, but this could also be intellectual property or just sensitive data that employees may be sharing on a day-to-day basis. So we want to provide them an option of a resource that they can send out these files or collaborate on these files, but ensure that we still have visibility and control of this data, especially with a dispersed workforce, that is going to be a very key component. And there are various deployment options with MoveIt. Obviously, we could go on-premise is going to be one option. We also have a cloud offering. So if we wanted to have a very fast deployment model, be up and running, provide that resource, there is a SaaS offering for that. Really, the visibility into who's accessing these files, where are they accessing them from, that may be part of an IP whitelist, that sort of thing. So we want to ensure that that is going to be taking place. Additionally, the security of these files. So when files are uploaded to the MoveIt service that we're going to be looking at today, we're automatically encrypting those files on the back end using AES 256. If we did have some more automated processes or processes where we're going to be delivering to a trading partner, that's something where we could potentially be using PGP encryption to ensure the security of that file in transit. And then, of course, being able to automate these processes. So with a dispersed workflow or workforce, we may have situations where users are not able to access systems would typically. Typically, VPNs are going to help assist with that, but there could be situations where we have script running up on the server, we have no idea what it's doing. The person who ran that system has left the organization. Now we don't necessarily have visibility into that or the control. So those are things that we can do with the automation component. Of course, part of this too is really going to come down to the visibility of this data. We want to ensure that we know where this data is going, who had access to it at what point in time, that sort of thing. So really the tamper evident audit logs within MoveIt are going to be the key component there to be able to facilitate seeing what is actually going on. Where is this data being transmitted? Now, from an architecture perspective, this is a very high-level data flow view. Now, this is just one really simplified architecture. Of course, we could do a defense in depth model. There's quite a few different deployment options, but this just gives you an idea. And today, we're really going to be focusing on the MoveIt transfer server. That is really the resource that is going to facilitate these person-to-person workflows where users can access a web interface. They could come in over FTPS or SFTP, upload, download files, and that is where we would be encrypting at rest as well. So as part of that, we can integrate with external authentication sources to help onboard users very quickly as well. But that's really going to be the key component here today. The automation server on the back end here is really a workflow engine. So we're going to be able to potentially say a report is going to be generated and delivered to a network share. We need to monitor that in an active manner, be able to be event-driven, and deliver that to a trading partner or place it out on the MoveIt transfer server itself. So there's quite a few various ways that we could configure this. Again, everybody's needs are going to be different, so we'd love to have a more in-depth conversation about your specific requirements and how we would be able to help fit in that. But both of these are going to have a web-based administration, so we can very quickly be up and running with this. So with that being said, really, I touched on this, but the key workflows that we would be able to help with MoveIt is really going to be from the automation perspective, a system-to-system type workflow where both sides are going to have an automated process to pick up or drop off files. But then, very importantly, in this situation, more of a person to person, or maybe even system to person or person to system type scenario where uh, files are going to be generated. We need to make them available to individuals. They may not necessarily have direct access to that network share anymore. We want to provide them a resource where we can securely send that data to them. And of course, as far as a person to person, that's really going to be more of the collaboration aspect of this, where we can empower our users to actually send out a document to an external party, have them review it, and maybe reply back. And we can empower them to do that by automatically provisioning user accounts, things like that, as part of that process. Now, really, the benefits of MFT over a typical FTP platform would be the things that I've already touched on ultimately. But to summarize, it's really going to be about the automation of these processes, being able to actually have visibility into where are these files going, were they generated, being more proactive in the sense that if they weren't, and as Greg mentioned, if we do have SLAs surrounding these, where did the process break? How can we go in and resolve this now? Of course, there are going to be integration points like REST APIs and things like that, but really the visibility, security, encryption at rest are going to be the key components there. Automation, again, with MoveIt in the terms of automation, the key benefits there are going to be that there is no programming required. It is all just a web-based interface where we can kind of click those components together, but it really ensuring those SLAs are being met, ensuring that we have the visibility into those processes, whereas dispersed scripts might not be the best way to facilitate that in most cases. Now, if we're talking about the individual MoveIt components, I know I touched on these. There's quite a few other various ones. For example, the defense in depth with MoveIt Gateway, for example. So we can shift all of those resources to the secure network segment. But being able to be quickly up and running is really going to be a key component with the MoveIt Cloud solution. So we can really quickly spin up, provide users this resource. We don't have to create the infrastructure internally. There's quite a bit less friction in that regard. So that's very helpful. And again, depending on what your requirements are going to be, there's various ways or various modules that we would use within the MoveIt ecosystem. So in some cases, you might just require the automation or just require the file transfer capability with providing that externally facing resource. Those are the sorts of things that we would be able to do within MoveIt. And again, we'd love to have a more in-depth conversation about your specific requirements. So with that being said, it's really good. Let's actually go take a look at it though. So what I have spun up for us here today is the fact that we can go in and really see exactly what the person-to-person workflow might look like. So in this case, in this example, I am logging into the interface as an internal user. I need to send data out to an external recipient that may actually not have a user account provisioned for them currently. So in this case, that is what's going to take place. We're automatically going to provision and onboard that external user. But from our internal user perspective, all that they would need to do is come in to either the web interface, or we do also have an Outlook plugin. But we can actually come out here and basically we would just be entering in who we want to send this package out to. So I'm going to create a user account for somebody who does not have an account today. And we could just enter in whatever we need to for the subject to let them know what's going on. The body of the message we are going to store securely on the MoveIt transfer server. So we're going to have the same level of encryption for the body of the message by default. And any files that we associate with this package are also going to be uploaded to the MoveIt transfer server. They are going to be stored there until the external user comes in, authenticates, and then downloads the file. But at this point, from our internal user perspective, we hit upload. They are now uploaded to that MoveIt transfer server. They're now associated with this package. So at this point, I should also mention these files that are being uploaded, there are no file size limitations. So if we are dealing in some cases with very large files, that's also another pretty common use case that we would see where we're not able to send these files through email. We need to provide a resource that our users can actually send these files out, basically. But at this point, all we would need to do as this user is hit send. We are now going to actually send out the email letting the external user know they have a new account. They're going to get credentials. They can then log in and access this information. So from the external user side, we get two notifications. One telling us we have a new package. We can just simply click the link here and be taken out to this. We would then be prompted for this information. As part of this process, we have a time-limited set password link in this case. So we're going to actually go through an onboarding process where our user is going to enter in their email address, is going to be their username in this case. And they're going to go through a request password process. That's now going to be sent out to them. We can also enable multi-factor authentication. So we're going to, as part of the onboarding process with these users, we would automatically do that for them as well. So they now get that link where they have requested the password. The onboarding is going to have them reset their password. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And now that we've done that, we're going to be taken directly to the package that was sent to us. And we can now download these files. Again, there's no file size limitation there, so these could be quite large. But let's say this is a scenario where we need to have a back and forth between these users. Maybe this is an NDA or a contract that needs to be downloaded, signed, and returned. Very simply, this external user can now just reply back to this message. We're going to go back to the original sender in this case. It would only be able to go back to the original sender, so they're not going to be able to, let's say, enter in the CEO there or something like that. But they could then write in their message. They can upload the files back here if they needed to. For these external users, same thing. No file size limitation. They're uploaded directly to the transfer server and encrypted at rest. And now this user can just simply hit send again. We're in turn going to notify the internal user they have a new file available, or a new package available rather. They can come in and pick those files up. So pretty straightforward process to facilitate this type of person-to-person workflow. We can also do a mailbox situation. So if we maybe have a team that is going to handle these, a pretty good example of that might be like a loan origination department where we're going to be receiving a lot of documents from individuals. We potentially need to distribute that to a team. They can then triage or take those documents in as they come in. So there's quite a few different ways that we could configure this one as well. This is just one example. Again, depending on your use case, it might look a little bit different, but ultimately the facilitation of the workflow is going to be very similar to this. Now, I mentioned that really one of the key components is going to be the visibility into these processes. So from both an administration or a auditing standpoint, or maybe even management standpoint, we can actually come in and take a look at all of the activity that's occurred on this system now. So we can come into our logs, we can pull out exactly what happened here, whether that's users attaching files to package or uploading files. whether that is sending out actual notifications, users signing on, signing off, or actually any administrative actions as well. So if we maybe create a folder, define permissions, create user accounts, all of that is going to be visible in the audit log as well. Now, I like to frame logging as really good. We can come in and see what is actually happening on this system, but it's relatively linear. Another really good way to get some visibility out of here is going to be through our reports. And there's probably about 100 or so built-in canned reports. I'm just going to pull up an example here, but we do provide the capability of actually pulling up or creating a custom report where you can query the entire schema and really pull out whatever information you're going to need in that particular use case. Now, with that being said, a pretty good example here for just a quick report would be something like a user list where we can now see when was the user created, when have they last logged in, when did they last change their password. And again, this is just an example canned report, but gives you some idea of the visibility that you can actually have from at least the user administration perspective. Obviously, we can also generate reports on file activity or things like that. So that's not a problem. So with that being said, again, we would definitely like to have a conversation regarding your specific use case, and we would definitely be able to help with that. But as far as demonstration today, that would conclude that. So I'll turn it back over to David, I believe.
Yeah, great presentation, Andrew. Really loved the live demo. Thank you for sharing that with us. So we do have some questions here for you from the audience coming in. And while we do that, why don't we just bring up the resources here I know that you all have for more information, just so everyone has plenty of time to see those. I want to point out that I've posted the link for the free trial of MoveIt in the Handouts tab. If you click on Handouts, or actually if you mouse over the slides window right there, those links are hyperlinks. So if you click on the link for the free trial, that will open up in your web browser, as well as the link to contact sales or contact Andrew directly. So let's do some Q&A now. So first question that came in, there's a few questions here around, I know Greg talked about working from home and challenges that we're facing as IT professionals. So one of the questions is about security. George is asking if you have any advice on data security. Is it safe to just use a VPN, or any recommendations around that from either one of you, Greg or Andrew?
Yeah, so I think I can answer that. Yeah, I mean, a VPN is going to be a very good step. So basically, we want to control access to these resources, whether they're internal or external. And if we are going to have to provide access or direct access to internal resources, I think a VPN is going to be one of the key components there. Now, with that being said, if we are talking in the context of MoveIt, that is basically what we're trying to do within MoveIt, is be able to provide a source where users are going to be able to interact with from an external resource like their home, and be able to interact with files on the back end. So whether that is, accessing that data on the back end through potentially an automated process, delivering those files to a directory or something like that. But we want to basically be able to still have the visibility and control as far as data ingress and egress from the corporate network in most cases. So I think a VPN is a good step. I would layer on top of that potentially an actual portal where users can go through to access the files, like MoveIt in a lot of cases.
Okay, great advice. Let's see, there's another question here about the benefits with with using a managed file transfer product over FTP. I know you said, traditional FTP, of course, just isn't enough. But what about, for example, George is asking about a secure FTP Is that enough, or I mean, what would the benefits of using MoveIt be on top of something like that?
Yeah, so a secure FTP, I think, is a really great first step. Obviously, we don't want to allow plain FTP to be occurring within the organization at all at this point in the current environment. So, yeah, I think that is going to be a good first step. And in some cases, that is going to be enough, especially if it is just internal resources communicating with one another. If it ever does need to leave the organization, or if it is highly sensitive or potentially data that's going to fall under regulatory compliance, there are a lot of the times going to be language in those that is going to require potentially encryption at rest or network segmentation, things like that, that managed file transfer would be able to provide over a traditional FTP server. So that's really going to be one of the key differences. The other one is that MFT platforms can integrate in with external resources. So if that is going to be from an authentication standpoint, we can integrate with things like SAML or Active Directory, as well as then being able to provide the visibility. So in MoveIt, for example, we're going to be leveraging a tamper-evident audit log that's going to be stored in a database. So it would be non-reputable, but also that's going to give you the capability of potentially going out to a SIM, aggregating those logs there, gaining some visibility, things like that. So it's really about the authentication, the visibility, and then the encryption at rest.
Okay, excellent. Another question, is MoveIt difficult to set up? Can you kind of talk us through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So MoveIt is actually pretty simple to set up and configure. MoveIt in of itself is going to run on a Windows server. So we would just have to have a Windows server deployed, but we're going to just distribute as an executable. It really just takes a few minutes to walk through the installer. Obviously, the configuration of connection to services, things like that, might take a little bit beyond that. But to have the service up and running, be able to accept connections, it really just takes a few minutes. Now, like I mentioned, there are a few deployment models. So that would be a more on-prem, or if we wanted to deploy in an IaaS like AWS or Azure, run on the Windows server. The other option is if we did want to deploy potentially even quicker and be up and running faster and potentially leverage some resources that we have at Progress, that would be the MoveIt Cloud service. So we can actually deploy as a SaaS model, where we manage infrastructure, all of the backend services, and then just provide you the web interface that you can go in and configure the connection to those external resources and defining permissions, folders, things like that. So pretty quick to get up and running.
I like that, yeah. Excuse me, I know a lot of companies, I mean, for example, my bank with mortgage documents and my accountant have both adopted similar solutions that aren't as user-friendly and aren't as nice to look at and easy to use based on what I've learned about the MoveIt solution. So I know there's huge demand out there for these types of solutions. More and more companies need, I mean, really every company needs this type of security. Next question they're asking about, can you make changes after it's installed? What sort of options do we have there, Andrew?
Absolutely, yeah. So both from the service level configuration, things like those various authentication resources, or maybe changing the branding, things like that, those are very simple to change. If we wanted to actually change deployment model, as far as if we go on-prem and then want to move to cloud, or maybe implement that gateway service after initial deployment, or add automation, something like that, that's really simple to do. We would just potentially do a migration or move that resource in network segments, depending on how you're configured, but pretty straightforward. And the nice thing is, if our needs change over time, so maybe today we only need that person-to-person. In the future, we then need folders and being able to provide a more defined workflow. That is actually just a drop-in license change. So that would be zero lift in that case. We would just apply the new license file. Those functions are then available to us. So no rip and replace, nothing like that if changes ever needed to take place.
Nice. All right, let's see. Next question. What are the reporting options that are available? Is a question from Matthew.
Perfect. Yeah. So from MoveIt, there's a few different options. One would be through the web interface, we can actually generate those reports. Like I mentioned, there's quite a few canned reports that we could leverage there, but we could also go out to a SIM, have those logs aggregated there. We could actually query the database directly. We could pull out information through an API. There's quite a few options there. So depending on what the requirements are for your particular use case, there would be some way of meeting that.
Absolutely. Okay, nice. There's a couple of kind of related questions here. Edward's asking if you can monitor files actively, and George is asking if MoveIt would complement or compete with a shared files, sync service like OneDrive or Dropbox. How do you see MoveIt fitting in there?
Yeah, so as far as the live view, yes, there is actually a view within MoveIt that we can see active transfers. So if a user is uploading or downloading a file, we can actually see the activity. And a lot of the time I hear that we have that screen up in a network operations center or something like that, where we can actually have visibility into that, see if files are failing to transfer, why is that occurring. So yeah, we can have that live visibility in that perspective as well. Now, as far as with the file sharing services that are out there, like Box, Dropbox, things like that, those are going to be more in the EFSS space, or electronic file send and share. Managed file transfer is going to be different than those. The EFSS solutions are going to be much more freeform and allowing the users to really kind of do pretty much whatever they want. There's not as many controls as there would be with managed file transfer. So just as an example, within MoveIt, when we have those person-to-person workflows, we can actually define a list or potentially a group of users internally that would be able to facilitate those workflows. Not only that, we could put in a control where we are going to only allow messages or these packages to go out to specific domains for email addresses. So maybe progress.com as an example. We can also put in controls how long this information is going to be retained for. So we might have retention policies that need to be complied with. We can archive that data, make it available from a historical perspective. The list kind of goes on, but there's much more control in the MFT space rather than the EFSS.
Got it. Okay. A question here from Deborah. She's asking about the pricing model. How does that work?
Yeah, so MoveIt is going to be licensed on a per server model when we're talking about the on-prem deployment. So when you deploy on-prem, it's pretty much unlimited usage. There are a few modules or add-ons, but it's relatively limited in that perspective. So, typically once you get the license on-prem and deploy, you're good to go. Now, if we were to deploy in the SaaS model, that is going to be a little bit different. Typically, that is going to be on a per user basis or a seat-based licensing model. But again, we'd love to have a further conversation regarding your requirements and come up with a good licensing model for you.
Okay, nice. A couple questions here about, are there any integrations with MoveIt such as Exchange? And then also, how would MoveIt compare to a PowerShell script? I know those are two separate questions.
Yeah, no problem. So From the Exchange perspective, really the integration point there is going to be more of we can leverage Exchange to send out those notifications, things like that. We wouldn't ever actually be transferring files through Exchange. But of course, we could leverage the domain credentials associated with Exchange to authenticate our internal users and things like that. So that's definitely not an issue. Now, where would MoveIt come in over PowerPoint script? PowerShell script. PowerPoint on the mind. Coming in over a PowerShell script, that's really going to be more of being able to provide visibility as far as where did these files come from. Maybe we have a script out there that's processing files and it's doing fine, but then we have a message from a business line user asking, what happened with this file a month ago? We need to see where it went. Was it delivered? A lot of the time with a PowerShell script, we don't have that visibility. So within MoveIt, we're going to have those historical records. We can go in, see where that file went to, where it originated from, was it actually delivered, as well as being more proactive. So we could say maybe if the file wasn't delivered and we expected that, we can send out a notification to let somebody know. So just being more proactive in that regard as well.
Got it. Okay. All right. So if people wanted to get started, I know we have the free trial link here. People go there, they sign up. Can you kind of walk us through what happens after that?
Yeah, so as far as the free trial, basically we would cut a trial license. It's typically a 30-day trial. And then you would be able to install, or if we were trialing cloud, that would be an option as well, where we can spin up a cloud environment for you. But yeah, so basically you would deploy on-prem, and you could configure as is production, and with the intent of potentially migrate, or basically just applying the new license file and leveraging that evaluation server in a production environment. So pretty frictionless there, but yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, sounds easy to do. Very easy to get started. Everyone should know the trial link is there in the handouts tab. It's also clickable on the slides window. It looks like that's all the time that we have for Q&A today, but I've really enjoyed the demo, seeing the product in action. Andrew and Greg, thank you so much for being on the event today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
For more information, the links, again, right there are clickable on the slides window. You can contact Andrew, reach out to sales, or sign up for the free trial. And before we go, I want to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. That's going out to one lucky winner. Here we go. Michael O'Shea from Maryland. Congratulations. Michael O'Shea from Maryland will reach out to you to deliver that gift card. I want to thank everyone for joining us on the event today. And of course, a special thanks to Progress Software for supporting today's event. Thank you to our presenters, and a big thank you to our audience for joining us on today's event. Hope you enjoyed it and learned a lot. I know I did. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.